doing, good people? This is the 8-Bit Animal. Alright, so instead of talking about a particular game today, we're going to do something fun. Today I'm going to talk about an accessory, a peripheral item. But not just any peripheral item. Probably one of the more groundbreaking unlicensed things to ever come out for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was developed by Codemasters, the folks that did all those fine unlicensed games like Fantastic Dizzy, Micro Machines, B-52, all those games. And you can tell by the gold hue on this item. But it was published by, and manufactured, I should say, and released by the folks at Glue. The people behind Micro Machines, those guys. And what we got was the first ever cheat device for the NES. And it was so wildly popular that later on these things were released for pretty much every console. Today we're going to talk about Game Genie. Now, Game Genie was released in 1990, and none of us really understood how incredible this thing was until we actually got our hands on it. And everybody in every neighborhood that I've ever met who had an NES knew one guy who had a Game Genie. And it was always cool because you get a Game Genie, or put your hands on one. You could rent one from, I know in my hometown, you could rent a Game Genie from any of the 2 or 3 video stores that I rented games from. And they would rent you the Game Genie, they would include the book with it, and also it became notable that even though the Game Genie initially wasn't licensed by Nintendo, and I don't know if it ever was licensed by Nintendo, there were Game Genie codes included in issues of Nintendo Power. So, fun fact for you guys. But how it worked was, let me grab a cartridge from over here. You get a cartridge. This one might not work because this is a repro of a Japanese game. But you would get a cartridge, plug it into the top of the Game Genie, like so. Make sure it's all connected. Plug it into your NES. Turn it on, and you would enter these codes. And there were 3 code slots on the Game Genie screen. And those codes, they combine to do different things. It depends on the cartridge and it depended on the code. And for instance, there was a code for Contra that gave you infinite lives. Now, we all knew that you could pretty much beat Contra on 30 lives. You didn't need infinite lives for Contra. There were codes where you could, but there was also a code that would start you with the spread gun, and you wouldn't lose the spread gun and die. Stuff like that. Little things like that. There were codes that would allow you, depending on the game, to start you at different levels, stuff like that. But the problem with the Game Genie arrived where some of these codes would cause games to lock up. So you would put in a certain code for a game, but the Game Genie wouldn't, because of this code, you wouldn't be allowed to finish a game. You get to the last level and the game would freeze, or a game would just lock up on its own. And it wasn't the fault of the game manufacturers or the fault of the Game Genie. It was the way the Game Genie interacted with the cartridge. So different games did different things with the Game Genie. And that's what made this thing cool, because you could experiment with it. So if ever you get your hands on one of these bad boys, you can find a treasure trove of codes on anywhere on the internet. Just Google Game Genie NES codes, and you can find there's websites dedicated to Game Genie codes for all the versions of the Game Genie, and they're constantly updating and adding more codes. So you should totally, if you come across a Game Genie, you still have your old NES, or you have an NES or something like that. Now, I don't know, this thing didn't really work too well with the Model 2 NES, and to my knowledge, it doesn't really work too well with some of the clone consoles. So you'll be better served if you try to use this with a Model 1 NES. I can't guarantee that it'll work with any of the clone consoles. But yeah, if you come across one, definitely pick it up. This is a must-have for any NES owner. Any old school gamer who has an NES should definitely get one of these, if for no other reason than the fact that this thing would allow you to beat the Turbo Tunnel in Battletoads. This has been the 8-Bit Animal. And I'll catch you good people tomorrow.